My project is on the genre, form, and style of playwright, screenwriter, and author Theresa Rebeck. I was first introduced to Theresa Rebeck at Pittsburgh City Theater, where I saw a production of her play Seminar, and I was immediately engaged. I loved the dialogue, I loved the characters, the subject was writing, so that was a bonus, and I went out and got her book, Free Fire Zone, which is a memoir about her experiences in Hollywood and New York. Not very positive, and I thought to myself after reading it, well, if I still want to be a playwright and a screenwriter after reading this, then I'm either really committed or I really need to be committed. And then came the scandal with Smash. Lots of controversy about whether or not she stepped down or was fired. The show went in a completely different direction. She derided the production afterwards, and it was just a big giant mess. And I thought to myself, is this just more fodder of betrayal and backstabbing for the next book? Or has she, like a lot of artists are known to do, dipped her toe in Lake Cray Cray? So I thought this project is the perfect time to explore her work and perhaps see if I can find an answer to that question and understand a little bit better why she writes the things that she does. So first, a little background. Theresa was born in the state of Ohio, and she went to Brandeis University, where she was granted a master's in arts, an MFA in playwriting, and a PhD in Victorian-era melodrama. She's written 36 plays in her life for 11 television shows. She's received screenwriting credit on 5 films, and she's the author of 2 novels and the nonfiction book that I mentioned, Free Fire Zone. She has been honored with numerous awards, including the Writers Guild of America Award for Episodic Drama and the Peabody Award, both for her work on NYPD Blue. And she also was granted the Penn Laura Pels International Foundation for Theater Award for an American playwright in mid-career. So it's really apparent to me that Rebeck's experiences in the television and theater industries have really inspired her writing. So let's examine that a little bit more in talking about genre. Now, Rebeck has been labeled for a long time now as a female playwright, a feminist, so to speak. And the label was seeded when she wrote Loose Knit, and it debuted in 1994, but it was really tattooed on her after the Butterfly Collection debuted off-Broadway at the Playwrights Horizon. Now, this was a play that had been very successful at a theater festival in California. The American Theater magazine had requested the script and was considering it to be published as an insert in the magazine. And there were lots of production companies around the country that had already expressed interest in doing this play. And then the New York Times wrote a review. Critic Bruce Weber basically labeled her as a man-hater. In the final paragraph of the review, actually expressed his concern and apologies for the director having to work with someone like her. It was really vicious, and although it wasn't the first time the Times had closed a play, it was the first time that they had attacked the playwright with the level of viciousness that they did with Theresa Rebeck. As she said, there was a flurry of upset. There were dozens and dozens of letters sent to the New York Times, which they refused to print, and they also refused to rescind the review. The Dramatist Guild was asked to get involved, but the bottom line is the play closed. She was persona non grata for a lot of years in New York, and all of the companies that were going to do the play all of a sudden dropped their interest. So it had a huge impact on her. And you can see that in her work as it continues to move forward, that she writes a lot about the hierarchy, the power, and the politics that exist between male and female relationships. She writes a lot about men and what male privilege looks like. She writes a lot about women who decide not to be a victim anymore and own the fact that they have a choice. So to discuss all of this in the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be dealing with 4 of her works: the play Seminar, the play Spike Heels, the television show Smash, and her play The Water's Edge. So in Seminar, the power play looks like this. Leonard is at the top of the hierarchy. He is a very smart, old, powerful writing instructor who is teaching a writing workshop in an Upper West Side apartment in New York City. On the bottom of the hierarchy is Kate, whose apartment the workshop takes place in. who's very smart but also very plain. And in between the hierarchy, you have Martin, Kate's friend, who is now living with her because he was evicted, who she's in love with. And he knows this, but he chooses to involve himself in a sexual relationship with Izzy, another student in the cohort, who is semi-smart but really beautiful. So at one point in the play, when it gets too much, Kate takes her power back. First, she writes a story and tells the group it's from a friend who is thinking about applying to the group. And when Leonard reads it, he cannot stop praising it enough. And in her mind, this proves to Kate that it's her appearance that causes him to hate her work. Then she chooses to seduce him, which she does successfully, and sleeps with him. And although it's not clear whether or not making Martin jealous was part of the goal, she certainly revels in feeling as if she for once is at the top of the hierarchy. In Spike Heels, which was written at the height of the sexual harassment awareness movement with Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, there are three people involved in this power struggle. Georgie, who is a sexy, smart blonde who doesn't appear to be very smart. Andrew, who is a very smart, very wise professor who is one of her neighbors. And Edward, his misogynist friend. Andrew feels very protective of Georgie, feels that she could get a better job, and so he convinces Edward to hire her. Edward immediately puts the moves on Georgie, and when she refuses, tells her that it would be easy enough to rape her since everybody in the office had already left. So Andrew becomes furious when Georgie tells him this, and the rest of the play involves the power struggle between, or among, Georgie, Andrew, and Edward. In The Water's Edge, it's really more of a two-person power struggle. Helen is a woman who has raised her two children after her husband Richard left the family 15 years ago. We don't know why until he returns with his new girlfriend, wanting to reclaim the home he abandoned that belonged to his family. And we discover that Helen and Richard's youngest daughter, Leah, drowned in the lake behind the house. And Helen was convinced that Richard was having an affair with the woman in the cottage at the end of the lake, and that is why he wasn't paying attention, and Leah wandered off and drowned. So she's enraged that he shows up 15 years later, and with a girlfriend in tow, and makes the decision to take her power back. And the way she does it is a little different than the way the characters in Spike Heels and Seminar do it. She convinces the girlfriend the family needs some time together. The two children who are remaining and Helen and Richard sit down, have dinner, and when the kids go on their way, Helen seduces him and then murders him and hides the body, convincing everybody that he decided to drop his quest to regain the house and has left to go back to town. So quite a different way for her to make the choice not to be on the bottom anymore. Smash also contains a lot of power struggles. Derek, who is the director of the show, which is a behind-the-scenes depiction of the antics that go on in developing a Broadway musical, is completely in a power play position over Ivy and Karen, the two ingenues who were battling for the main role. And then Jerry, who is a very powerful Broadway producer, is divorced from Eileen, who is producing Smash, and is constantly struggling to determine whether or not Eileen has the power to produce a Broadway musical. So, as you can see, her genre is very oriented toward the male-female power paradigm. So let's get in a little to form and talk about that. Rebeck has been said that she really approaches her work with a neoclassical mindset, that the nugget of the beginning of everything is based on story and character. And that she often writes not with the end in mind, but discovers the story as she writes it. She also writes in multiple mediums and varies her structure within them as well. So she's written one-act plays, full-length plays, 60-minute television, movies, novels. She really has a wide variety of forms in which she writes. There are a couple of hallmarks in her work. The first is that she always starts a scene with action. She feels very, very strongly that the scenes need to move forward and that they are the engine that drives the play. And the other hallmark is the verbal fencing. The dialogue is really about that in all of her work. So let's talk a little about an example about that. The first being The Water's Edge. And when the second act opens, this is the family dinner that I spoke of earlier. And Erica, the daughter, suggests that maybe they all go out on the lake and go fishing at night, which is a great time to go fishing, evidently. And although they don't do that, it gives hope that perhaps the family can heal from this chasm that has existed among them for 15 years. So that, even though it's a simple action, it really moves the whole play forward. In Seminar, when Scene 7 opens, Martin and Kate are discussing her decision to leave the group and replace herself with an old friend from Bennington. And on the surface, it looks like Martin is mad because he's concerned that this new person might be a better writer than he is. But the deeper layer is clear that he's really not happy about Kate leaving. And so this adds another dimension to the story and really helps to move it along. Spike Heels is also filled with action that pulls the story along. In fact, in Act 1, Scene 2, Edward shows up at Andrew's apartment and announces he's having dinner with Georgie. And this occurs after he basically threatens to rape her, and Andrew is appalled. He acts confused and hurt about Edward's behavior, but the truth is this Edward going out with Georgie is forcing him to admit that he has feelings for her, and that really moves the play along nicely. Dialogue is her second hallmark, and hilarious dialogue. In this scene, Georgie and Edward are discussing how Georgie met Andrew, and the humor in Georgie finishing with, "No, I thought he was a Jehovah's Witness," is obvious. I don't need to explain that. In Smash, Jerry and Eileen are having a scene in the divorce lawyer's office. And Eileen totally zings him, again, with the verbal fencing. It really is a hallmark of Rebeck's writing. In Seminar, and this is a pretty funny one, Martin and Kate are bantering back and forth because Kate is obsessed with Bennington College in Vermont and was there for 6 years. And in the end, Kate says, "I learned a lot there, Martin." And Martin says, "What you learned was how to write one lousy story in 6 years." So she really has a way of putting words in her characters' mouths that are biting and smart and funny. So that is the second hallmark of her work. So let's talk a little bit about style. The characters that Rebeck writes about are complex and even challenging. It never feels as if she's writing to try to manipulate the audience's emotions. She just shows people as they are, which are in varying shades of gray instead of black and white, and lets the audience decide whether or not they like the characters. She writes in multiple mediums, as I've discussed before, theater, film, television, as well as fiction. And my conclusion is that she's still both haunted and driven by her experience with the New York Times. Even though it was 15 years ago. She acknowledges that she never thought being a girl would be a problem for her in anything she took seriously. And how she was treated in that situation still affects her and influences her work to this day. Although she does not classify herself as a feminist or female playwright, it's apparent her work is largely about the subject of gender equality and the havoc that it wreaks. She pokes holes in the way we as a society view male and female relationships and the balance of power. And she also depicts the consequences of choice, whether the character is male or female. I really feel that her work is brave, funny, and honest, and I think those are 3 words that any writer would be thrilled to have used to describe her work.